Hi everyone, in this video we're going to go over the basics of Substance Painter. And instead of using this geometry, I'm going to review how to export geometry from Maya and bring it in successfully to Painter. This is geometry that's coming out of Bifrost, and so I first need to convert this to a mesh, Maya mesh. So I do that by going to the mesh, the final mesh component or node here, tab, terminal, and I'm going to, oops, I don't want a terminal, but an output. There's one here. Put this in here, right click, and create a Maya mesh. So now I have a mesh in Maya, so I can leave Bifrost. This is going to be connected to Bifrost, so I want to delete all of this, freeze, center the pivot, delete the history, and freeze the transformations, and break the connection from Bifrost, and now I have a mesh here. If I hide this, you'll see I still have my Bifrost mesh, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that one, and then shift with Control H, Shift H to bring this mesh back. Okay, before I bring this into Substance Painter, I need to do a couple of things to clean it up. It might be able to paint successfully. We know that we need new UVs on this. If I open the UV editor, I don't have any UVs on this, and I know that I need those. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and run a couple of things here. One is remesh. So I'm going to run the remesh tool. And you can see that this made it denser, but if I go to the attribute editor, I can actually play with that max edge length. And I don't want to lose too much detail, but I can make a much more even, oops, don't want to go down too much, make a much more even mesh by playing with this edge, max edge length. Once I'm happy with it, Q takes me back to select. I can now center the pivot, delete the history, freeze the transformations, and I have a clean object. Quad meshes tend to be a little bit better, so I might actually want to take the next step and use the mesh retopologize tool and turn this into a quad mesh. I did this previously for this mesh, and so I have that one hidden. It takes about, this one took about 4 minutes to do, so, and the results from the retopologize are this. So now we have a nice clean mesh. Okay, so let's say you have something like this. We do have some individual parts here, but I'm not going to separate those. I'm going to keep that with the mesh. And I'm just going to go ahead and go to the UV, oops, sorry, the UV editor. Look at this, and I want to create the UVs automatically for this mesh. You can see it puts us into this one tile here, WER. Just going to scale that down a little bit. Actually, don't really need to do that, but you can if you want to. And we'll be going over this in a moment. Okay, so this is showing me the tiles. Now if I right click here, object mode, I can go back to this guy. Okay, so at this point I could just go to File, Export Selection. Oops, sorry, this is totally too big. Okay, great. Bring this down, sorry. Okay, cool. And call this going into my, I have some scenes here. I want to go to my export folder, export, okay. And I'll call this tutorial 1, export selection. I did file export selection. I was using the FBX export, cancel. And now if I go to Substance Painter, I can create a new project. Okay, by default, it will ask you to select the template. We want to just use this top one. It's fine. We need to set the document resolution. Since we're now in texture land, we're always going to be using a square raster image or set of raster images to capture our texture information. And we're not pushing geometry around anymore, except at render time when we use displacement. So we could either use a 1K texture, 2K texture, or 4K texture. Let's start with a 2K texture, and then any images that are generated in that texture tile will be 2048 by 2048, and this is what is called a 2K texture. Now we need to select our mesh, and let's come over here. So I have, all right, one screen is much bigger than the other. Tutorial 1 FBX, select that and hit OK. Discard this project, and now I am opening this new object. By default, I could just start painting on it, but a couple of tips here. One is that we should always change our environment settings from panorama to something like Studio, one of these Studio HDRIs, because these won't have color information. If I hit F2 here, F3 rather, or F1 shows us the split mode. I can see here that it looks like I have color on my object, but that's coming from the environment, this panorama. So I always want to change it to something, one of these Studio HDRIs, like Studio White Soft works well. Okay, some other tips. Now I could start painting on this. Let's say I want a red color. Where did I do that? Here, material itself, base color. I'm going to make this red, and now I can start painting. However, as I explained in class, we don't want to really use paint layers that often. It's much better to create fill layers and then use masks. So I've created a fill layer here, and now I want to create, I can set the base color to red, and right click, add a black mask, and it seems like everything goes away. And now, however, I can come in and paint in this mask, and basically erasing the mask and revealing the color underneath. And the great thing about this is that I could set up a lot of information here about, like, I don't even have to use like a paint or a solid color. I could use a material, and I could really paint with that material just by erasing the mask. I could also, invert the mask. Whoops, sorry. I think I should be able to toggle the mask. Go with that. Toggle the mask. Invert mask. There we go. And so I could invert it like that. And it just gives me a lot of flexibility here. And the other thing I could do, if I wanted to be even trickier about this, I could add a black mask again. I could even add multiple paint layers to this mask. So now I'm painting here, right? I could turn that off. I could add another one, add a paint layer to this one, paint around, and I could have these different options just by kind of painting with that mask. If I want to erase, I hit X, that inverts the brush, and I can erase that. Okay, so that is going to be, that's the sort of general intro here, but let's also look at some other options that we have here for bringing things in from Maya. Okay, so one thing that can go wrong is if your texture crosses a tile. So let me go to the UV editor, and let's see, I just want to UV shell, select these shells, W, and let's see, let's say I like cross from out of this original square. Okay, I'm going to File, Export this, oops, I need to Q to select. I want to go back to, Object Mode, Q Select, File, Export Selection, Tutorial 1 FBX, Export Selection, yes. Now I'm going to go back to Painter and re-import it. File, New, this is all fine, 2048, select. It has the same name, Tutorial 1 FBX, open, hit OK, discard this one, and you can see that I get this failure here. And if I click on that, a little box will come up. Errors have been found while splitting meshes. Meshes 2 has faces spanning across multiple UDIMs. So what's a UDIM? UDIMs are the multiple tiles in the UV editor. So UV dimension. This initial square is UV dimension 1, so UDIM 1, and then we have all of these other UDIMs around it that we can use. I'm just hitting Control Z to go back, and that puts this guy back in this one UDIM. So why is that important? Well, because we can actually have multiple meshes and put their layouts, their UVs, into multiple squares. And this gives us a lot of flexibility in Painter for how we work with these meshes. Let's do a simpler thing first, object mode. So we know that this one has multiple things, right? Let's say that we wanted to, we have a more complex scene here with multiple objects. I'm just going to duplicate this one, and I'll rotate them around like that, make them a little bit, or make this one a little bit smaller, even squish it a little bit, something like that. So just so it's clear that we have these two objects and they're different, but they're, let's say they're even overlapped like this. So if I look at the UV space for this, UV editor, so this guy, his UVs, the UVs are the same because the object hasn't changed, even though it got squished a little bit and rotated, still these textures are the same. So now if we wanted to texture these things differently, the easiest way to do this is to, if we look at the attribute editor for this one, let's go ahead and just delete all of the history on this. We can see that so this one has the material Lambert 1. This one also has the material Lambert 1, or shader. If we want to treat these, if we want to texture these things differently or independently in Substance Painter, then we can bring it in with multiple shaders attached. So this object, if we just export this, File, Export Selection, Tutorial 1, Export Selection, yes, bring it in, go back to Painter, File, open recent file, new one, 1024, 2048 rather, bring this in as tutorial 1, open, okay, discard. Now it comes in successfully. I have the two objects, right? And I can paint over them, and I'm painting them over them all at the same time. Okay, and it seems to work pretty okay, even though the texture space for these objects is overlaid. So whether that's a problem, yeah, that might be a little bit of a problem down the road, because I can see like I'm painting down here, but it's also painting up here. So because because both of these meshes now have their textures in this same space, and they're sharing the same material, we can get some strange results. So that's something to be aware of. So what's a way to fix that? Well, we have a couple of options. I mean, one, if we want to texture these things independently, the best thing to do would be to right-click this, assign favorite material, and just make a new Lambert. So now this one is Lambert 2, and this one is Lambert 1. It doesn't change anything about where their texture spaces are. They're still overlaid, but it's going to solve the problem that we were getting before. So now we want to grab these guys, File, Export, Selection. Export Selection, yes. Go back to Painter, File, Import, or New rather, 1024, and we're going to, that's fine, so you can select the mesh. Tutorial 1, open, okay, discard. Okay, cool. now we have because we have two different shaders assigned in Maya, we can actually paint on these things without problem. We have to paint on them separately though. See, when I have this one selected, see it's Lambert 2, so the shader name now becomes the part name, if you will, inside Substance. So if Lambert 2 here, if I want to paint on Lambert 1, then I pick this one, and now I'm painting no problem. I can paint it here, and I'm not going to affect this one. If I want to paint on this one, then I can just select its material name up here. So even though we have two meshes, their UDIMs are overlaid, but it's no problem because Substance keeps them separate within this material organization. And we could rename these things if we want. I'm going to show you another way that we can actually work with this, and that will give us even more flexibility. So another way we could do this is we could number one, select this object and assign the existing material, put it back to Lambert 1. So that means that Substance won't understand these as two different parts because they have the same shader. But we can go to the UV editor, and with this one selected, right-click UV shell, select these. I'm going to scale them down, just R key, scale them down just a little bit, just so I know that they're fully within the tile. I'm just going to move them over into this tile, and then maybe I'll scale them up just a little bit. We have to be careful. We don't want to cross the tile because we know that that can give us an error. Okay, great. Now, when we go back to right-click, object mode, if I have this one selected, we can see that this is over here. And if I have this one selected, we can say its texture, its unrolled UVs are in this second UDIM. And they're both sharing the material Lambert 1. Okay, now let's export these files. Export selection, tutorial 1, export selection. Okay, great. Go back to Painter. Do this one more time. File, new. That's fine. Make sure we're up to 2048. Select tutorial 1, open. And if I look at the, so this should be checked by default, use UV tile workflow, but this is important. UV tile settings, UDIMs, and we want to make sure that we're using the UV tile workflow, and we want to make sure that we have this one clicked, preserve UV tile layout per material and enable painting across tiles. Okay, great. So we do that. Discard this. Okay, cool. Now we see that we have two objects. Well, we still have one object based on our shader here. But this everything in this texture set preserves the structure, has the structure or the UDIM structure from Maya preserved. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the environment, change this back to one of our studio settings so we lose that color information. Let's go ahead and delete this, make a fill layer, give it a color, red, add a mask, add a black mask. Okay, so now you can see I'm painting on this one. I can paint across these tiles, which is nice. So I can treat these things together. But if I hit undo a couple of times, the other thing I can do is I can mask these tiles. So here in this layer here, with respect to the color, I have this box here. And so we do this by layer or by folder. Let's say as I'm painting in here, let's see, go back to our paint. Oops, I want a paint layer. Go back to our mask. Let's say I don't want to be able to cross the tiles like that. I just, in my fill layer here, need to click this box. And then I can do this in either by deselecting the tile and masking it there. I can select it here within the window, or I can even select it in the viewport. And once that's grayed out, you can see that it's masked. Now, if I want to paint again, I just need to, or erase within that layer. See, I can't actually paint on that one, but I can paint on this one. And so why is this so powerful? I think this is really the best way to do it, organizing it by UDIMs, because it could be the case that we might want to, let's say, apply a global texture to everything, but then change the color settings. So let's just go ahead and show how on individual parts of the mesh. So let's see how we would do that quickly, and then I'll wrap things up. Okay, so how would I do that? Let's see how this is really, really useful. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new fill layer, and let's just go ahead for the moment, turn this, go back just to the overall thing here. And let's say that I want to add an overall texture to this object. I'm going to go ahead and go to my textures here. I'm going to come down to the grunge, let's search for grunge. Oops, I need to actually be in the textures, that'll be helpful. And let's choose maybe grunge, dirt scratched. Okay, grunge dirt large, let's use this one. And I'm gonna bring this over for my height information. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the color because we will color these objects independently. And so what's nice here is that you can see that this is coming across both objects. Of course, I wanna use the triplanar projection, and then just Q for select, and then if I want to change the tiling here, I can hold down on Shift, and I can think about where I want it to go, rotate this a little bit, and so now I have texture going across here. And once I have this set up, I could come back and just very easily pull in different textures. This is grunge dirt splats. That gives a slightly different texture. It's looking pretty cool. So I'm gonna stick with that. And you can see that it's texturing the whole object. But if I wanted a different texture up here, I could just quickly come to this, right? And mask that out, and come back to the fill layer, and you can see that that texture is now only applied to the bottom one. And I could, for example, duplicate this texture and come back to the masking. I could swap them like that. So now this texture is just being applied to the top one. Come back to our view here. And then if I, let's see, wanted to do this, I could contrast, rotate. Sorry, coming up to the tiling here. I could change the scale of that texture, the top one, for example, or I could change the rotation in some way and work with things that way, right? So I think that that's pretty great. So maybe what I'll do here is go ahead and turn this texture back on, and then change this one, this top one, from a texture to a color. So right now this texture is only being applied to the top one, and this one is being applied to both. So let's just change this from a texture. Because we have the height information here, I'm going to turn the color back on, and this is grunge dirt splats. So I'm going to pull this into the base color, and I'm going to turn off the height. So now the height information, if I turn off that color, is coming from this fill layer down here, and the color information is just being applied to this one. Okay, so this is pretty boring with just a black and white, but what I'm going to do here is add a fill. And this fill, I select this fill. Let's go to the fill itself, the fill, something, material, base color, uniform color. This is a bit odd here. What is happening here? Let me get rid of that. I'm going to remove the effect. Hold on, let me pause the video and see what I'm doing wrong. Okay, what I was doing wrong is I didn't want to add a fill. I want to add a filter. There we go, filter. So then my filter, I'm going to choose a gradient. And this is cool because now I can change the colors of this thing, and I can also pick colors from anywhere. So, for example, let me not pick colors from Maya. Let's just open the internet browser. By default, oh, it's the Knowlton website. So let me pull this down a little bit here, and we have an image here. And so I can just use this image if I choose to pull this over, make it bigger. I could use this image. There's also Adobe Color, which is really cool, but I could just come over here and start playing around with picking images or picking colors just from this random image. And this gives us a pretty interesting result. And then by default, this color quality might be set to 3. I can add additional things here. Let's come up into this sort of zone here, add additional colors to the whole thing. Now, when I add another color, both of these things are set to 1, so I need to pull this down, and now that's changing things. Oh, now I could come back here and really play with the color positions, and the color positions will determine how much of each color is really being set into the, and also as you kind of pull them down, let's say color position 4, now it's not up near the 1 anymore, it's not up near this position. So it kind of reverses where it appears in the whole assembly. So that can give you different results. You just have to play around with these positions and to get interesting results here. And of course I can pull my texture back on. So now I'm controlling that texture and color independently. And again, you know, this one is masked out. If I wanted to apply that color to this one too, I could just go back and change the mask. So again, you always get to the mask over here, and you're controlling the fill and all of these things over here. So right now, this color is actually following the same kind of thing that we have on the for the texture, but we could change that here by just pulling over a different grunge, right? And then that is going to completely change the way that that color is being applied. You know, a quick thing that we could do then is just duplicate this layer, and now we're going to change the way that this is happening here, the color here. Let's go back to the mask. We're gonna unclick that one. And so now we're applying this color to the one down here. We could come back to this gradient, right? And play with this. And now this one is getting, it's the same color palette basically, but we can completely change the way that these things are happening. And so what's really nice about this is that, again, like each of these colors is being applied. Let me go hit F1 to see the split screen. The texture, again, is being applied down here, the height. Let's also note that we're not seeing the displacement, so if we want to turn that on, we need to come up to the shader settings here. And even though it's enabled and height is enabled here, there is no height set. So the first thing we can do is start sliding this, and we'll see that we're now getting some displacement. But of course, we're not getting a lot of detail here, so we want to bring the subdivision count way up. And then we bring this back down, and we'll start to see something more interesting happening there. Okay, but basically this height information is being applied here to everything. And then the color information is being selectively masked. Some of these, or these tiles are being selectively masked. So using this UDIM workflow can be really, really powerful. So this is about the height on, and then this is with the height. And we can control the height with the displacement. That's more of just how it's displaying. But if we actually want to tone down the height here, what we need to do is we're in color. We need to change this. Let's come up here, go to from base color, and change the channel to height. and then change the way that, or change the strength. So this is basically the opacity, right? So I can take this down to 0 and we have no height. And then we can just ease this up to where we think this is looking pretty good. So that's a lot. And we can kind of bring that down to something that is more reasonable. So this workflow gives us a lot of flexibility. And I think the other thing that would be really, so go back to F2, so we're seeing the whole mesh here. The last thing I want to show you is that we could actually update these in Maya, and maybe I'll do something cool here, like turn on the shadows. Let's get some more interesting effects here. So we really kind of see how this is texturing. Turn those off for a moment. Let's go back to Maya. Where are you, Maya? Okay, cool. Let's say that we liked everything that we were doing, but we weren't really happy with, let's say, the size or positions of these things. I could move this one over here like that and re-export it. So File, Export, Selection, Tutorial 1, FBX, Export Selection, yes, and bring Painter back under, where is it? Edit. Under Edit here, we can re-import the mesh. And ta-da! We don't lose any of our texturing information, and but yet these things have updated their position. I haven't talked about baking mesh maps. I'll do that in a different video or explain it in class. But sometimes when we re-import meshes, we have to rebake these maps. These maps are useful for generators, which I haven't talked about, but this is something that we can cover in another spot. But just be aware that if you start re-importing the mesh and you've baked these mesh maps, you might need to rebake them. Otherwise, you could get wonky results. Okay, so that's everything we're covering in this video. Thank you very much.